Welcome back, Richard. It's good to see you after we took another week off.
We did. I forgot about that.
Yeah,
We took a week off. I was traveling and battling other things, but yeah, we're back. It is the beginning of August,
yep,
and that means that at least in our part of the country, the children are going to be going back to school in a few days.
that's right. So a couple of weeks ago, as just before we took the week off, we did a couple podcasts on education, and we talked about how there's concerns about the state and the status of the education system, and we about how we need to really be careful who we're blaming for that. And we are going to continue our conversation about the education system today because some new things have developed and some new things
Right.
are going on, at least in our area of the world, and some things that on the surface often look good, but I think it's important to talk about some of the potential consequences and issues associated with it. And so we're going to touch on that today.
Right. I guess we could have subtitled this Unintended Consequences. Seems like every time we try to reform the educational system, we get some unintended consequences that nobody could have anticipated. Anyway, in the previous podcast, we talked about public schools. Public schools are really under attack. They've been under attack for probably since the mid 80s and 90s. Um, they have been for decades. But something has changed because until recently, most criticism of public schools had the goal of reforming them and making them better. The first Bush administration
Right.
had several educational reforms. After that, Clinton, and after that, the second Bush administration. But all these criticisms were meant to make the schools better, to fix some of the problems, systemic problems that existed in public education. Today's critics they want to destroy the entire system.
Sure seems that way.
And in fact, they've succeeded because the Department of Education was dismantled in the past couple of weeks. We no longer have a Department of Education. So, one of the messages we wanted to get out was it's our opinion that destroying the public school system, destroying public education, is probably filled with unintended consequences. I mean, be very careful.
Right. Well, especially since, one of the statistics that we mentioned in the previous podcast was that 85% of students, every 85% of K-12 students
Right.
educated through the regular general public education,
Right.
So that leaves 15% who go to, private schools and home schools and, maybe even some of the charter and magnet schools. But generally speaking, 85% of students attend regular schools. And so
Right.
the more that it's worked to dismantle it or to tear it down,
Mhm.
we're affecting more and more of these children.
Right. And solutions, you begin with the public schools are terrible places. So you come up with these solutions like magnet schools and charter schools and vouchers and homeschooling. All of those things benefit a tiny number of students.
Right.
If you've been sending your children if you live in Florida and you've been sending your children to a private school for years, you suddenly now get an $8,000 check for each child. That's like an income enhancement, you know.
Right.
And so it helps this particular family, but it doesn't make the public schools better. It's not
Right.
really a solution, okay? When the public schools educate 85% of students, you can't even talk about dismantling a system that has that many millions of children. What do? You dismantle the public school system. You got to replace it with something.
Right.
And I would guess that something is going to look very much like a public school system.
Right.
The third point we made was whatever's wrong with schools, it's not the teacher's fault. Teachers are a very easy target. It's very easy to blame the teachers,
Mhm.
but they're not the problem. In fact, if we want to solve these problems, it's going to require teacher input. And
Right.
that's some of what we want to talk about today. Teachers have a knowledge, teachers have a deep understanding of education and children in today's culture, and we need to use that to make it better. Um, the last point we made was that elected officials, um, they keep saying, we want parents to have more choice. We
Right.
want parents to have a voice. Well, there's a danger with that because you can there aren't enough places for every parent to make a decision about what school they want their child. Let's say you have school A and they have 400 seats in that school, and 1,000 parents want their children to be in that school. You
Right.
don't have enough places for everybody. All right.
Right.
Second, we have this new thing called opt out. Okay, where you can, if your child doesn't want to be exposed to something, they can opt out of that lesson or that class or that part of the lesson.
Mhm.
Think of the logistics of that. If kids are able to come in and out of classes because they want to avoid some topic, where will they go? Where do
Right.
all these kids go? Who will supervise them? We don't have enough teachers now.
Yeah.
And they're saying, well, we're going to opt out. Well, who's going to supervise these kids?
Right.
The
Right.
thing about public education is it's public for everybody.
Right.
And so you develop a system that works for most people. Everything isn't going to please everybody all the time. It's just a fact of how this is going to work. Even if you put your kids in a private school, you may not like everything that happens in every class every day.
Yeah,
Okay.
you can't have a system that serves 85% of a population and expect every one of the 85% to have individual say about everything that happens. I mean, it's just, if you think about it, it's just not feasible. I
Right.
mean, there is no system that could sustain that. And the original focus of today's podcast was going to be to talk about an article that came out earlier this year,
Mhm.
focusing on some complaints, 11 complaints that teachers say that parents of this generation should really be concerned about.
Right.
Um, and it came out earlier this year, but then as you said, we're getting into a place here in Florida where students are getting ready to go back to school within the next week or so. And there have been a number of articles that have come out because of a new state law that we have here in Florida that is going to be maybe a new complaint that teachers are going to have, a new concern that we need to consider as it relates to kids going back to school, and it has to do with their cell phones. Florida passed a law that enacted on July 1st prohibiting, and it's a state law, state statute that prohibits
Mhm.
elementary and middle school students from using their phones in any way from the time the bell rings in the morning until the bell rings in the afternoon to release school. Um, and high school students are only allowed to use it in class if the teacher permits it, if there's a specific thing that's related to what they're doing in class and the teacher says it's okay, and at lunch, I think, and maybe some between classes. So high school students have a little bit more flexibility, but the specific thing is that elementary and middle school students are prohibited from, they can have their cell phone with them, but they are prohibited from using it in any way from
Mhm.
bell to bell, is what it says. Um, and that is going to create a lot of interesting things this year. We anticipate.
This is good. Yes. Florida already has a policy
Hmm.
that looks very much like this.
Right.
The only difference is now it's a state law. Now
Right.
it's in statute. It's going to be tested in the courts. This is going to be
It's so much a state law that it reads in the way that, our local district talked about it, is that it even gets to the point where if a student continues to do it, that the school is to contact law enforcement.
right, right.
I mean, that's and all we can go by really is what some of these articles say and things like that, because it's brand new and nobody has enacted it yet. So we don't know what's going to happen on a day-to-day
Hmm.
basis. But that is what has been considered, is there needs to be a line in the code of conduct. There has to be something specifically said about it. And it could get to the point of contacting law enforcement
Right.
because of a student using a cell phone in class.
Because it's illegal.
Right.
Okay. So we mentioned the cell phone ban, because it's one of the concerns that are listed in the article that we want to talk about today.
Right.
And and it has to do with when we talk about criticism of schools, it's not just teachers, it's not just administrators, it's not just laws, it's not just the Ten Commandments. There's also there are also a generation of students who are bringing to the classroom specific kinds of attitudes and behaviors. And
Hmm.
one of them is they're distracted by technology. Okay.
Right.
So we thought this is a good time to talk about these issues. Cell phone use, I think what the school boards and the Florida legislature said was, let's quit dealing with this issue. Let's
Right.
just ban their use because they are getting in the way. I mean, kids are on their phones instead of paying attention. Okay.
Right.
So I
Absolutely.
understand the goal,
Hmm.
okay, because you have to deal with, let's just get rid of them. Let's just do away with them altogether. It's a
Right.
good goal, okay? And it's one of the 11 concerns that this author lists. Now we've taken the 11 and we've narrowed it down to seven. We sort of collapsed them into seven categories, and but you and I have added an eighth, and we'll talk about those as we go along.
Right.
So as teachers, as we begin another school year, um, what we have to keep in mind is that we are dealing with a generation of students who are bringing a unique set of challenges to schools and to education in general, right? One of them is technology.
Right. And
What-
and and that's, it is important to emphasize, and you said it's a good policy. The idea of saying, okay, no cell phones during the school day, is a good policy.
Mhm.
Cell phones are distracting. You have students who are using their cell phones not for academic purposes, but for other purposes during the school day, during class.
Mhm.
We know what the research says as far as, the more that a person uses the cell phone, the more problems they have related to loneliness, the more issues they have related to anxiety, the more difficulty they have focusing. And so restricting that use, I think, is a great idea theoretically or philosophically.
Right.
Practically, there are a lot of concerns. And this is, my mind can't help but go to who in the world is going to enforce this?
Right.
Who is going to make sure that students aren't using them? Is it going to be the teachers? Because, you have a teacher who's already working hard enough to make sure that the kids are staying on task and, learning algebra in middle school. Um, but then they also have to police cell phone use. You know,
Right.
at least in our district, they're encouraging teachers not to be the ones who take the phones away from them because, what happens as soon as the phone, oh, well, my phone has a crack in it now.
Mhm.
So now the school is going to be liable to replace the phone. Um, it's just, I can't imagine the nightmare of issues that are going to come about as a result of this. But, to the author's point, you know, the author's point is that these are concerns that teachers have that parents should need to be aware of, and that parents need to consider.
Mhm.
Parents do need to consider what this means for their kids' education. The amount of use they have on their cell phones.
Right.
Parents want to have constant contact and connection with their kids. It was one of the things that we saw as it relates to our local district. They said that we're going to go back to the days where if a parent wants to talk to their kid during the school day, the parent is going to have to call the school.
Mhm.
I don't think that's going to happen.
It's not gonna, that is not going to happen.
I don't think that's realistic, because we know these parents, we see these parents, we talk to these parents, and that's not what these parents are going to do that.
Right.
I mean,
Yeah.
I hope they will, but I don't think they will.
No, I think the devil is going to be in the details here.
Mhm.
Every parent knows how traumatic it is when you take your child's cell phone. Now, imagine a teacher or a principal taking a child's cell phone. You're going
Right.
to get the same reaction.
Yeah.
They're not going to acquiesce and say, "Oh, it's okay." No, you're going to have a fight on your hands. You're going to have a battle.
Yeah.
Okay. These phones are extraordinarily important to parents and children.
Yeah.
And so it'll be interesting to see. Now, we do not disagree for one moment that kids are distracted by technology. The problem is, and what this author is saying is, These kids are coming into school. They could care less about school. They care about their computers. They care about their cell phones. Right?
I will never forget witnessing back when I worked in the schools. I'll never forget witnessing a confrontation. I'll just call it a confrontation between this a dean, probably 6'8" former basketball player dean, very large man, um, being going toe to toe with a 5'5" eighth grade student because she was using her cell phone at a time when she wasn't supposed to, and he said, "You need to turn in your cell phone," and she said no.
Okay.
What was he going to do?
Right.
And
Right.
they were going toe to toe in the hallway of the school.
Yeah.
Um, she would not give it over. And he can't search her. He can't take it out of her pocket or take it out of her
Yeah.
herself. What is he going to do?
Hmm. Hmm.
And so it's there are these concerns. What happened? What does this look like? What's going to happen with this?
And if the teacher passes the problem on to
Right?
the principal's at the same disadvantage.
Absolutely.
Doesn't matter. So that's one thing. So these kids are coming into school. They're not interested in what's going on in this building. They're interested in what's going on screens. Okay. And
Right.
that's number one. Number two, reading and math scores are going down. I don't care what anybody reports. Reading and math scores are going down. And the reason they're going down is because this kind of learning that it takes to learn how to read and understand and to do math calculations, whether it's long division or algebra or calculus or trigonometry, doesn't matter. It's an effortful process that requires a lot of engagement and a lot of practice.
Mhm.
And most kids simply don't have the attention span or the motivation to invest what it's going to take. You all remember learning the multiplication tables. You
Mhm.
remember the effort that it took to do that. Kids don't want to have, they don't want to expend that kind of effort to learn these things that they really don't care about anymore.
Right. Yeah.
So that's problem number two. Problem number three, they want instant gratification.
And the we've talked before about the concern, not just with this generation, with the last few generations, the issue
Mhm.
of they are incapable of delayed gratification. They want what they want right now. And technology, we can go back to number one, technology is a big
Right,
piece of that because anything you want to know, you pull out your phone and you got it there.
right,
Even with the math and reading thing that you were mentioning a few minutes ago, I remember when I was in school, people would say, "Well, why do I need to do this? Because I can always use a calculator."
right.
At the time, you would have to carry a calculator with you. You
Hmm.
have your phone that has a calculator built in, so you always have a calculator with you. But it's that instant gratification. We want it right now, and if
Hmm.
I have to wait any period of time for something, you know, there's an issue with it, and so they avoid hard work because man, this video game or this TikTok or this video that I'm watching or whatever it is much more interesting right now than doing any of that other stuff, and so I'm not gonna do
Yeah.
it.
They live their lives with immediate gratification, satisfaction, stimulation. They're on it hours and hours and hours every day. And then to say, I want you to stop and slow down and compose a paragraph or a story, they just can't shift gears. They can't downshift. Okay. So, so that's what they expect is for everything to happen quickly. Just tell me what you want me to do, I'll do it, and then get back to what I'm really interested in. Okay.
Absolutely.
Number four, reduced attention and reduced motivation.
Right.
We know they have reduced attention. We all have reduced attention, but these kids also have reduced motivation. They're simply don't want to do the work.
Right.
Um, they
And
come to school with no intention of working very hard.
right. We'll concede, I think, that part of that is related to COVID. Again, we've
Right.
mentioned many times before, we all learned very quickly during the pandemic that, 7.5 hours worth of school can be done in about an hour and a half or 2 hours.
Mhm.
You know, and so I think that that's part of it. But the other part of it is, again, just the instant access to whatever you want. I mean, if
Right.
somebody says, who was president of the United States during the Civil War, you can
Mhm.
get your phone, you got, here's the answer. Why do I have to read a textbook about that? Why do I have to go and listen to somebody talking about that?
Mhm.
I want to know any of these specific, how long did this war last? What countries were involved in this? Or,
Mhm.
um, you know, how do you write an essay on this? You go to ChatGPT or, some AI and it will tell you, why is there motivation or why would we expect there to be motivation to do some of these other things in school? And I think that's a realistic issue that we have to find a solution for.
That's right. And along with that, students lack curiosity.
Yeah,
They are curious for what they're curious about. It might be serious, it might not be serious, but they are not curious about what we're trying to teach them in schools.
right. They're
Okay.
they're not at all. And it's maybe it's that the material is very dry compared to what they're used to being,
Right.
stimulated by.
Mhm.
But they don't, it's almost like they just don't care to know. Why? Why do I need to know that? Why would I want to know that?
Right.
And it truly affects and limits critical thinking skills. Like we can see from a psychological perspective, from a developmental perspective, we can see the limitations that it's going to cause as time goes. But that lack of curiosity. Um, it, I don't know if you ever watched the show Ted Lasso.
Mhm.
But there's this great scene where he's doing a talk, he's talking to this guy about when he was being picked on as a kid, and he said he read something that said, that just said, be don't judge, just be curious. And
Mm.
curiosity is so important.
Right.
Just wanting to know is so important.
Right. And several years ago, we started doing this sub-skills approach, just learn these facts, okay? Just
Right,
learn this and learn this piece and learn this piece and learn this piece. And then we tested you on those pieces at the end of the year, okay? It's called standardization, okay? What students learn from that is they just do what they're told.
right,
Fill in the sheet, complete this worksheet. Nobody really cared about learning. They cared about completing the worksheet and then filling in the bubble. Okay,
right,
taking the test and getting the right answer. There was no curiosity. There was no inquisit. It wasn't fun. And then we have these programs dropped on us by would-be reformers like Florida Writes
hmm
and accelerated reading. And those programs, like Florida Writes, you learn to write according to a formula.
right,
Okay. You're not writing in an expressive way, you follow the formula. We've
mhm,
talked on previous podcasts about one school thought the kids were cheating because all their essays looked the same. Well, they looked the same because they were doing what they were trained to do. Okay,
right,
you do this paragraph and this paragraph and this paragraph.
right,
Also, accelerated reader, you have to read and you have to pass. It sucked the joy out of learning. These kind of programs take all the joy, all the pleasure, all the curiosity out of learning. So while the intention was good to make sure that kids could read, the unintended consequence was we took all the joy out of learning.
right,
Okay. Also, from an social emotional standpoint, we know kids don't have high levels of emotional regulation.
right,
They they have temper tantrums. They do have explosive outbursts. They can't handle conflict. They
mhm,
can't handle interpersonal conflict. And they're bringing that to the classroom.
right,
That there are more fights. There's more anger. There's more aggression. Okay?
right.
And then the problem of absenteeism.
Right.
Uh,
And I think the absenteeism is a combination of all of these other things. You take the poor problem solving, especially problem solving of emotional issues. You take the lack of critical thinking, you take the lack of motivation, you take all of these things and put them together, and then you have the issue. It doesn't surprise anyone that we have, issues of chronic absenteeism in nearly 25% of students. School just isn't important to them.
it's not important, right?
And unfortunately, and again, the purpose of this article is that it's not, it doesn't even seem like it's important to parents. Because
Mhm.
parents let them stay home. Parents let them
I couldn't stay home without
work.
permission. Right.
Yeah.
Mhm. Right.
So those are from that article, but we added. we added our another that we think is a big challenge that we really want parents to consider, and that is the issue of entitlement. Um, my goodness, kids just think, for the sake of sounding like an old curmudgeon, um, it, kids just think that they are the same and equal, and have just as much say in everything as every adult does.
Right.
I had a kid not too long ago, like this kid is like in third grade, and he's saying, well, the teacher doesn't respect me, I'm not going to respect her. And I'm like, bro, you are 8 years old. Like, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
The teacher respecting you. And what he means by respect is not asking him to do something he doesn't want to do.
Mhm.
Well, you don't want to do schoolwork. She's going to
Right.
ask you to do schoolwork. So this entitlement, this position that so many kids have now, that they should have the absolute final say in whatever happens in their world, including what happens to them at school, what happens to them in the community, what happens to them at home. That sense of entitlement is very concerning because where does that lead? Where is that going to take us?
Yeah, it's I have there was a boy, I think he was probably 13, maybe 14. He was out after curfew one night, just fooling around. Not He wasn't doing anything bad. He was just out after curfew, and he was stopped by a police officer, and the police officer started asking questions, and he just said, "I don't have to answer your questions."
Yeah,
He just said, "No, I'm not going to answer any questions. I don't have to talk to you. You can ask me as many questions." 13, 14 years old, and he's telling a police officer, "I don't have to answer your questions."
yeah.
You know, and they're bringing that.
Hmm.
This is what teachers are dealing with, is
Right,
that children, students do not feel that they have to do anything, that they have to obey any rules, that they have to put up with anything they don't want to put up with.
right,
Now, so we want to blame teachers, but keep in mind that teachers are working with raw material called students, and students are bringing all the technology, all the attitude, all the lack of motivation. They're bringing that to the building every day. All
right,
right. And and yet we're asking teachers to ask the students to do this very hard, very effortful work that takes practice and effort to learn how to read, to learn how to do math, to learn how to be a critical thinker. And these kids just don't want to do it. It has no value for them.
right.
Okay. And
Absolutely.
so keep in mind, before you blame teachers, keep in mind what's coming into the building every day. All right.
Right.
And we haven't talked about AI. All right.
Right.
We're,
Right.
we're-
That's a whole other thing.
you know, so
But with all of this in mind, let's just remember and consider that these issues, they're not
mhm,
going to be solved by school choice. They're not going
right.
to be solved by opt-out systems or banning books or any of those things. It's not going to be solved with those issues. This is going to be almost like a ground up,
Mhm,
a bottom up type
right.
of fix that needs to happen because we have to, well, yeah, I guess you could make the argument of whether it's bottom up or top down. A massive shift has to happen
Mhm,
at both the school and the home to change some of these things because, again, we have these expectations that we put teachers that we hold for teachers,
mhm,
um, but yet at the same time we're giving, we create all this latitude for parents and students that make what we're expecting the teachers to do nearly impossible.
Makes it almost impossible. Mhm.
And then we're blaming the teachers, we're blaming the schools for that, and it's, you know, I don't know that it's the school's fault. How can we blame the school for issues that the school
Right.
isn't capable of fixing?
Yeah, there was a great cartoon a couple years ago where the parents, a generation ago, a kid that got bad grades, the kid got in trouble.
Right,
Today, if a kid gets bad grades, the teacher gets in trouble.
right,
It's the teacher's fault that the kid isn't getting good grades.
right,
The teacher's doing something wrong. No, the teacher's not doing anything wrong. This is it's a different world than the one all of us grew up in.
right.
And we need to consider the the uphill climb that teachers have today because they're the ones who are dealing with these kids who don't want to be there, who don't want to work hard, who would rather be on their devices.
Right. Yeah. And you know, we have to, I think that we have to back off of teachers
Hmm.
to a large extent
Right.
because, you know, these difficulties that we're seeing are not because of incompetent teachers. You know,
Hmm.
teachers, nobody becomes a teacher because they want to torture and
Right.
brainwash and mistreat kids. No, nobody wants that. Nobody has the intention of making sure that students fail.
Right.
Um, and believe me when I say no teacher is saying, you know, I have all of this stuff that I have to teach. I'm going to be held accountable for these students' test grades and for how they perform in school. I'm going to be responsible for all that. But at the same time, I'm going to brainwash them and teach them these other things and kind of lure them into this other world that they are not interested in. But I'm going to, you know, convince them that that's what they need to do. Teachers aren't doing those things. Teachers are doing what they can do. They're doing the best that they can do to make sure that the students are learning the material that they need to learn to meet the standards that they need to meet. And so, you know, they're doing so in an imperfect system with imperfect raw materials, as you said, that come with their own set of issues, their own set of problems, their own set of world perspectives that the teacher has no control over.
Right.
So let's just be mindful of that and try to you know, afford some grace to those who are really trying to do work that Lord knows I would not be doing.
Right.
I could not be in that position.
Yeah, so as we begin this new school year, if you have children of school age and you're going in for orientation, be kind to the teachers. Thank them for the hard work they do. You know, we thank our service members. Thank you for your service. I think we should do the same thing with teachers.
Right.
Thank them for their service because they have an incredibly difficult job under very, very difficult circumstances, and they're only getting more criticism from elected officials. It's a very difficult set of circumstances that we're asking our teachers to take on. So,
Absolutely. All right. Well, I think that is it for today. We'll be talking more about this stuff in future
right.
podcasts. So until next time, stay happy, stay healthy, and forget to be afraid.